Hello and welcome to another edition of Behind the Book with Bill. Today, my guests are Zac Goins and Will Tramp. All right, guys, thanks for being on the show. Let's start off with your origin stories. So, Zac, we'll start with you because I don't know you as well as I know Will. So, Zac, what's your background with gaming? How did you get started?
I got started in college. I was a tutor in student support services, and I got invited to play in the cool game with all the cool professors and faculty at the college. And so it was me, a young punk kid, and you know, teenager, and then I think the age gap jumped about 15 years to the next person. Um, and I fell in love immediately, and I played with those guys for years. And they encouraged me to dive in even deeper and go off the deep end, and it's been a blast ever since. But yeah, started in college with Pathfinder and D&D, and then pretty quickly moved to fifth edition once that came around.
Will, what's your origin story?
My origin story, about 24 to 25 years ago, somewhere around there, a friend of mine, back in like it was middle school, invited me to come to the local hen house to play. I think it was either the hen house or the game store. I can't remember which. We would go to either one. Anyway, so sit down at the table with my very first character. I died in the very first scene, and there was no backup character for me to play. So for about 2 hours, I had to sit there and wait for my mom to come pick me up from where we were, and I was so angry by the experience that I decided to go out the next day and buy all of the books because I was going to be a game master and ensure that this never happened again. And I've been spitefully playing ever since for over 2 decades now.
Excellent. I'm glad that your wipeout didn't derail you from gaming because I think
Uh,
that happens with a lot of people. I get these stories from people who are like, "Yeah, I played that back in high school and I died right away and it kind of sucked, so I just gave up on it." And I'm like, "Well, don't give up. Death is a natural part of all gaming." So,
right.
um
And so is spite, I've learned. It's mainly the spite that fuels me. So.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, one of the reasons why I was so excited to bring you guys on and talk to you was to really dive into writing and games and game design and kind of your insights into that process. So let's rewind the clock. Zac, you got into gaming. What were your first writing projects or game development projects, and how did that happen?
Yeah, I think pretty quick after I started playing fifth edition, I started writing some stuff, subclasses, things like that. Just tinkering with homebrew. And then somebody, and I'm gonna fail to remember who it was, but somebody put me onto the DM's Guild. Um, and I noodled around with that for a little while, just putting out like, oh, here's a subclass or here's a little adventure or whatever. But I think I missed the wave on the DM's Guild. If you'll remember, if you were into that at the time, like there was a huge wave early in where projects could get, if you did a good job, which I'm not saying I did a good job, but in those early ones especially, but like there was a big wave of like if you did a good job on the DM's Guild, you could make good money. And they were like recruiting people for certain projects. WotC was, and like it was kind of this really cool space. I think I came in right at the tail end of that and realized that like if I want this to be anything more than just a thing where I put out and sell a couple dozen copies or whatever, I was going to need to do something different. Um, and so within a few months, I started trolling like different Discord channels and Facebook groups of creators in the space, and I was looking for people who were already successful there who are looking for writers or designers of some sort. So I did quite a few collaborative projects on there, which really was helpful. It kind of let me know what, a publisher or a head creator was looking for and what the expectations were. I did a handful of small projects there, and that kind of pulled me into the discovery of Kickstarter. And once I found Kickstarter, I was kind of like, this is the space that I actually love. This is a space for me. Um, and I think all this happened within, I would say, roughly about 6 to 12 months. But I ended up doing a Kickstarter with my brother-in-law. We did a project called Oceanic Depths, which was a resource supplement for aquatic adventures in 5e. And it did really well, at least for us. We funded a soft cover book. We laid out that book. We wrote that book. We had it printed at a local printer. We fulfilled that book. All that kind of gave me the lessons and the tools to see how the sausage was made and, where my space could be in it. And at that same time, about the time we were starting to fulfill, my wife and I moved um, several hours away, and I had to quit my job. And so that was like my opportunity to say, hey, I could maybe do something different. Let's try this. And so at that point, I dove in head first and did a lot of writing, a lot of designing, a lot of crowdfunding, and a lot of consulting. And I've been doing that ever since.
What was that like? In other words, did the people with whom you were working kind of give you the setup, the prompt or whatever, and then you would create parts that were kind of assigned to you, or was it a little more free form in the collaboration? How did those early collaborations work?
It depends. Like I think the first one that I took was actually with Jeff Stevens, of Jeff Steven Games. He's still publishing. He's still a good friend of mine. He's still great. Um, And I think that was just Jeff was doing these books of like monster type NPCs at the time. And they were just on the DMs Guild. And he had a bunch of art assets. And he would say, like, pick an art piece that you feel like inspires you to write a character around it. And then here's a template of what we want. Here's a Word doc or here's a Google Doc or whatever it was. And I want 2,000 words by X date. Um, and it was pretty much, I think, pick a piece of art, and I think there was maybe like a little like give me a paragraph write up on what you plan to do. And at that point, it kind of just turned us loose, and I wrote. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but that was kind of the first. And Jeff was super organized. And then on the other end of things, sometimes you would you know, apply to be a part of something and you would get approved. And let's say you expected to do something like that, 2,000 words in a very specific quadrant. And then you would get in there and you would find that it was a disorganized mess and like the scope had creeped exponentially and there was nobody, steering the ship, so to speak. And, sometimes you just tried to get a quick exit. Sometimes you believed enough to say, like, let me help here. There's projects that, I would sign on to do 2,000 words. And by the end of it, I had done 20,000 words. And I was wrangling several writers or whatever, right? Like, you just never knew for sure, but you ended up finding people that you connected with and that you resonated with and that you felt like you could work together. And then, over the past few years, some of those people have kind of stayed on, or I've stayed on with them and, seen other work. And other times you've been like, wow, that was a good learning experience. Maybe not worth it, maybe something I would not do again. But A, it was good learning, and B, it's one more piece in the portfolio, which was always early in the early days, something that I was thinking about was like, I'm not so worried about how much am I making per word or, how quickly did they pay me or whatever. What I'm worried about is, will this actually get made? Will this actually become a product? And will that product like be another bullet point in a portfolio or in a resume that will make me more attractive to the next person? Um, and most of the time, the answer to that was yeah. And so I think I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
It does, and you kind of touched on one of the follow-up questions, because I like to talk about not just successes, but because oftentimes we learn from our failures or from when we had to overcome obstacles. So going to the point about paid, right, or the value of a given project. Were there times where you did content and you weren't paid for it, but there was a another perk, maybe, getting your foot in the door with someone or some company, or maybe you did it because it was, like you said, a solid bullet point in the curriculum vitae and the resume. Talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people are concerned, like, about jumping into a project or contributing to something and not being compensated or not getting credit or that kind of stuff. So what was your experience like with that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens. I think like some of the projects early on, you're taking a percentage, right? Like you're agreeing to write to say like, hey, we're going to put this on the DM's Guild, or we're going to do this as a Kickstarter, and we're not going to pay you up front, but you'll get 5% on the back end or whatever. Um, Sometimes the pay is in a word rate, and I think like if I look back, the word rate was never the reason that I ended up feeling satisfied or dissatisfied with a project. There's projects that I took for 4 cents a word, which I think now people would look on and say is like abhorrent in a lot of ways. But I don't see that work as being dissatisfactory or abhorrent. I think that like I wrote that for that project. I got paid for that project. It was another bullet point. I learned things, and money is money. Money to do the thing that you like is always a win to some extent. So I would say that rate wise in the early days was all over the place, and I just didn't let that be the deciding factor for what I was doing. It was, do I am I excited about this project? Do I want to be associated with this creator? Do I think that there's a future, more projects, or whatever? And um, I think that by and large, I always got paid for the if there was a contract that expressed a word rate, I think I always got paid. Um, there were definitely projects where when you got into like the cuts or the commission side of things, that it was not worth it for what I ended up doing. That's probably if there was a point where dissatisfaction came in, it's like, oh, I came on getting 5% as a writer, but then I ended up having to manage a whole bunch of the project, and I wrote way more than I expected to. I wrote 30% of the book and I only got paid 5% commission. And to this day, I've made, 80 bucks on, 20,000 words or whatever, right? Like that's obviously not worth it. Um, but that's a learning experience of saying, if you're agreeing to a percentage, let's make sure that the role is defined for you and that you believe that everything outside your role is going to happen. And if you get in and you determine that that is not the case, then exit as gracefully and as quickly as you can. Like it doesn't, I've done that several times over the years now where I'm signed on with a certain expectation, saw that that expectation was not the reality, and had a reasonable, not hostile, not confrontational, just a reasonable conversation with the creator to say, I think what I thought this was and what it isn't compatible. I don't think that I can be a part of this in a way that's going to be satisfactory to everybody. And so usually in those times what I would typically say was like, hey, if I've written something for you already, it's yours. I don't need it back. You don't have to pay me. Consider that my like contribution to the project. I wish you the best of luck. I just gotta, extricate myself. And I never had anybody get, at least to my face, frustrated by that or anything other than saying, thank you so much. And I've always like that. I've never regretted doing that side of it. And I think the last piece is like, there's definitely been a few times I'll point towards like early days of writing for Adventures League where you were not paid. Um, for like the official organized play platform for D&D. That's what Adventures League is. And there is areas where you were not paid, or if you were paid, it was like in a maybe at some point 2 years down the line, you will get this product will go on DM's Guild, and if it does, then you'll get a small percentage. But the pay was just not there. But my choice in doing that was A, I was excited about Adventures League, and B, like being able to say, hey, I wrote for Eberron, I wrote for whatever the setting was. That was exciting to me. And it definitely was like a nice like portfolio bullet point to say like, oh, I wrote for the Eberron organized play platform or whatever. And all that's improved dramatically over the last few years. It's not the same as what it was. But yeah, I think there was definitely some times when I accepted a job knowing that the pay was going to be non-existent, or at least there was no guarantee of it, but I felt like it was going to help. I was doing it for exposure in I guess the way that I was happy with.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. It's my read on what you're saying is that there may be a process. You may have to go through a process of doing some things for little or no pay, but that, you're learning from those experiences, certainly from the successes and the failures. And I mean, I think that's incredibly valuable for people to know and understand about kind of the behind the scenes or maybe the business end of where creation goes and how it evolves.
Sure.
Let me chop over to Will. So, Will, what was like what were your early experiences like with writing and with game content?
Well, for the first, I would say, oh goodness, let's see, 7 years minus 24. Probably for the first like 17 years of my game mastering career, like I wanted to write. That was always my dream, is to see my name in a book. That's still my dream, see my name in a hardcover book. And I refused to do it. I would not write for anybody. It was just the scariest process I'd ever heard of. And frankly, to be honest, I had no idea that there were games for a long time, that there were games outside of Dungeons and Dragons and then Pathfinder. Like I kind of grew up in the TTRPG. How I grew up in the TTRPG sphere is again this very small bubble. I only knew the three books that I was or the books I was able to buy at the local game, not the local game store. I didn't have a game store. I had like Borders and then Brentano's. And so my so I assumed that to be a writer you had to work for Wizards of the Coast, and that's the only option you really had until Paizo kind of blew up, and then which is woefully wrong. When DM's Guild came out, I'd been talking to my wife about how much I wanted to be a writer, and she convinced me to just put a little something out onto the DM's Guild, and it got some success. Like I think right now it's like a gold bestseller, and I felt pretty good about that. And then I felt really good about that, and so I didn't write anything else for 2 years because hey, I did the thing. But from there, I started to I kind of started kind of dipping my toe back in every now and then, trying to get into the writing and working on a lot and just doing a lot of solo projects again on DM Skill, just releasing my own things. Little adventures here, little supplements there, things like that. And then it really wasn't until the past probably year and a half, I would say, that I was able to actually kind of break into like actually working with other people and making connections with other people to be able to start like doing like freelance work and like writing for things that weren't just completely produced by me, right? So I think my first real job really was actually kind of with Zach in a way. It was Zweihander Reforged. Daniel Fox brought me in on that to do some writing. I think primarily because most of the conversations that he and I would have around gaming would center around my absolute obsession with how adventures are structured. And I have this weird thing about structure. I need to know the structure, right? And that's most of my complaints or commentary about any pre-made adventure I do. So he hired me to do some work on helping develop a structure for those adventures, and then writing there, and then through Daniel, I met Zach, and I'm sorry, Zach's over here according to my little things here. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, and then I've been jumping on the some collaborative projects with Zach, and then through Zach, I've met a couple of other guys who have needed people just here and there, and I've probably within the past, I'd say since this year began, I've been put on like 12 projects, which is, 12 times more than I had done any year prior. So, yeah, it was yeah, it's been wild. It's been a crazy year so far. It's very exciting.
Let me ask you in like, so if say for example Zweihander as an early project, as an example, what were some of the challenges that you faced that, as a new contributor to this content, and what was the collaboration like? Was it kind of a top-down directional thing, or was it more responsive and reacting in collaboration?
So it was I cannot tell you what the structure looked like from Daniel's perspective. I can
Okay.
tell you that from my perspective, I was just working with Daniel, and that was it. The struggles I had with it were like probably the biggest struggle that I had with it was that imposter syndrome, right? My name does not deserve to be in this book, right? And then the responsibility, he and Daniel and I had a lot of conversations about this, but also I mainly had this conversation with everybody else I could get to listen to me for half a minute because I was terrified to talk to Daniel about it, which is how long is it going to take him to realize that he made a terrible mistake in hiring me, and all my talk about how adventures are structured does not mean I can write, and all of my write like this is it took me like months to really get over this and like constant I'm a guy who lives on feedback, right? I need a feedback loop, and I would argue that that's actually one of the biggest challenges in the writing industry overall is getting good feedback, right? Under TTRPGs, it's not just about whether people said, hey, we love playing your game. Like I want to hear from the people I'm writing for, like, is this good? Yeah, it's great. Okay, but really, is this good? Like, is this what you want? And it took me months to get over that with my own friend Daniel, and then I'm still struggling with that to an extent while working with Zach and Jeff and everyone else because it's just like and I don't know how to get over that. I'm still trying to figure out like how to get over that particular hurdle. That would be, I would argue, the biggest challenge I have been facing is that understanding that I have a right to be I have a right to be here writing, and people want me here writing, and not just because I have a YouTube channel, right?
I think that's tremendously helpful because I mean, not even I think, I could tell you quantitatively that so far everybody that I've interviewed on this series and previous interviews, there's some talk about imposter syndrome. There's
Yeah.
some talk about questioning your value or your contributions or your worthiness to be included on a given project. So we may circle back to that when we get to DM talk later in the show. But I really appreciate you being willing to talk about this stuff because again, I think most consumers of these products don't necessarily know the process and what goes into it. Um, and also like if there are obstacles, challenges, what those are, or how they're faced. I think a lot of people assume that the biggest challenge is always like, well, funding the book or finding the right publisher, but like there are so many other obstacles and challenges just in the creation process that I think is valuable to talk about. So quick kind of follow up in this vein for each of you guys. I'm going to bounce back to Zach, but now Will, you'll have the same question. So thinking about old projects or previous projects, if you had a time machine and you could go back and do something differently with one of your early projects, um, what would you do? What project would it have been, and what would you have done differently? So Zach, I'll start with you, but then Will, you'll get the same question. And
I'll
maybe, how
be
about this? If it's hard to think of an answer, you could even consider if you had a time machine and to jump back in time and get involved in a project that you weren't involved in, or maybe one that
yeah.
didn't work out, what would that be?
Can we say Redbox? I would have loved to have been put on that project.
Yeah, there you
No,
go.
it has to be something within your gaming lifespan.
Yeah, yeah. I think that I'll go a little bit on a corner here, but like I made a detour for a little bit into doing a lot of print on demand stuff with drive-through. And I say a lot, a handful. I regret that tremendously for a variety of reasons. Um, I think just to get into the weeds for a second, like when you design a book, and I'm not the best layout artist or whatever, but I can do it all. I have experience with that. But I also work with artists. Um, when you design a book for print, there's a lot of places that you can go and take it to get it made, both here in the States and abroad, and you can do all sorts of varieties of things. Without exception, the only one that when you send your file to them will say, we need you to downgrade the quality of this is drive-through. Um, their system, they use a company called Lightning um, to for their print on demand services. when they offer print on demand and when you send them their files, you have to downgrade them to a level that their old machines can handle. And if you don't downgrade them, then what they will do is, quote unquote, accept the file. And their process is basically they accept it. You have to order a proof. You get the proof to your house. And if you like the proof, then you can basically unlock it for wider availability for sales, right? Um, and there was a time when I thought, well, maybe this is a good answer. And I know a lot of people use it for a variety of reasons. But what I found was that I think there was one book in particular that I think I ordered six different proofs and had to continually downgrade, 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 downgrade to get to a level. And each one of those proofs, by the way, is, but depending on how much you're willing to pay for shipping, 4 to 6 weeks of printing and
Oh.
getting to me, just so I can say, oh, this downgraded. Okay, but it looks like shit because, sorry, it looks like crap because of how their machines go. So how can I downgrade this further to where their machines can understand it? Okay, I got to cut this. Okay, well, that's another week lost. Okay, now I'll send it off and I'll have to wait another. So it was like, I believe that project lost like 5 to 6 months of timing on fulfillment on a Kickstarter because it was this back and forth down scale. Does that mean that everybody that's doing drive-through RPG print on demand is wrong? No, absolutely not. And I think there are certain projects that it works out just fine for. But for me, that was a huge misstep. And for what I want to do in the industry and for what I want to see my books look like on the shelf and all that, I would happily, you know, get rid of that side detour and just stick to traditional printing and publishing.
Excellent. That's exactly the kind of stuff that's insightful and helpful, I think, for understanding that. That's great. How about
And
you,
I
Will? Oh,
Real
sorry, go
quick,
ahead.
sorry. No, just a quick aside, because I know that that sounds like if you are a new publisher or a new creator and you were thinking about doing print on demand, that can sound awful. I would just do a quick note that if you're doing just black and white, it's going to be fine. And if you are willing to go outside of drive-through for your print on demand services like Lulu, like Jeff does, or like Mixam just put out a drive-through program, I think this year, last year, like those are a lot better quality. They're still not the same as like doing a full print run, but you at least don't have to downgrade all of your design files to make it through them. So take what I'm saying and say that was for Zach, but depending on what you're making and what your vision is, there's still plenty of print on demand options, and drive through may even be one of those.
Sure. And I think to your point about, what works for each person. Obviously, people need to do their research when they're looking at self-publishing and print on demand. But I think that's, it's still very valuable and I appreciate you also, sharing some alternatives. Um, Will, what about you? If you had the time machine, you could go back
Oof.
and do something differently with a project, one of the early projects, or maybe have gotten in on some opportunity that you missed out on. What would your time machine story be?
I would probably go back and not have that first dinner with Zach because that's just thrown a whole wrench in my entire. No, no.
Yeah.
There are two things that I would definitely change. The first thing I would do is I would go back in time. So a lot of the things I released on my own on DM's Guild were things I'd been sitting on for a very long time. I would go back and release them significantly sooner. Right? It's that is the biggest thing is I wasted so much time. I feel like I'm trying to play catch up now to years of not doing what I've been wanting to do, and now this year I'm like 12 projects and keep going. I'm like that's a lie. I don't necessarily need to be doing that many times, but I need to get my name out there. I need to keep going. I need to get that practice in. I would have started doing this 10 years ago at least, right? The second, if I had a time machine, if I was allowed to make two stops on the way. So I would go back to this summer, which isn't that long ago, right? We did this project that's coming out called Devoured Labyrinth, and I'm very, very happy with that project. It's one of the coolest projects I've ever been a part of. But since we did that project at the beginning of summer, I did some more work for Jeff Jones on a so far unreleased thing that we're working on. And Jeff and Zach both separately said two things that really stuck with me. Zach told me at one point, he's like, "Hey, I like working." I like working with you on like classic fantasy stuff. You do the thing that we like the stand like kind of the bog standard fantasy." And then Jeff was telling me, "Hey, you need to I need you to get weirder with this." And like that was his notes. Was like get weirder. And I didn't fully I was trying to wrap my head around what does that mean, get weirder. And then finally I sent him this adventure about a month ago that was just I stopped listening to like the voices in my head telling me, "Hey, you need to do it this way so he'll be happy," or "You need to do it this way so it'll be commercially accepted." I just did this adventure that I thought was neat and handed in, and he's like, "This is super weird, and I like this a lot." And I realized I'd been in my head so much about this, about how I write the adventures, and maybe my voice doesn't need to come through. I would go back to the Devoured Labyrinth, which is probably the project from the summer that I'm the most proud of being a part of, and I would just get a little bit weirder than I was before. I wouldn't play it nearly as safe, and I think it still would have. I think it would still fit with what the project was, but I think I would be a little bit more proud of my contribution because I will have taken off the self-imposed mental shackles that didn't need to be there. And that's a learning experience. That's what I'm learning right now is like, hey, I don't need to necessarily play it as safe as I have been. And, the weird things in my head that I put onto paper, some people actually do like it. Hey, great.
Talking about these projects in the time machine, let's kind of talk about more recent stuff. In your career, evolving as you think about, what projects really took off that maybe shaped how your career has gone. We'll start with you, Zach. Like maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest or the most commercially successful, but like what is a project that really kind of shaped or revolutionized how you approach these projects and that you are kind of carrying with you now in your belt.
Yeah, I would say probably the one that could be the easiest like through line is Seven Aboard the Shackle, which is a Mork Borg book that I put out. Um, I didn't understand Mork Borg for a while, like the first year or so that it came out. I saw it, I owned it, I read it, I just didn't get it. And then I finally, through talking to a couple other creators, Ed Burrell being one of them, I was like, oh, I do get this now, and I want to make something for it. And so I did Seven Aboard the Shackle, which was like, it's a dungeon crawl aboard a prison hulk, which is like a ship that's been decommissioned and isn't really seaworthy, but it still floats. And it uses a deck of cards to generate the areas of the ship and the creatures that are in it. So instead of roll tables. Um, uh, I had a blast making that. It was like everything that I wanted to do at the time. It was Morg Borg. It was weird. It used this weird card generator system that made GMs discover things alongside the players. It used Seven Deadly Sins as like a theme around it all, like a bunch of stuff that I really, really like. Um, and it did very well on Kickstarter for the project and for the time and all that. I was super happy with it. And then since then, I mean, I think we did two different print runs on it, and it's continued to sell well. It is a project that's still like pretty much every show, and we do 12 to 15 shows a year. I'll have somebody come up to me and say, I ran Shackle and I really like it, or I'm running Shackle currently, or whatever. Um, so it's definitely the one that has gotten like has kind of like filtered and saturated the community in a certain way. And I think it also allowed me to ingratiate myself and kind of integrate with the Mork Borg community, which is kind of ended up being how I connected with Limithron and Pirate Borg, and that's a big part of my life right now. So yeah,
Awesome.
I think Shackle's that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. Will, how about you? What's a project that has really had an impact on not just your career, but on how you kind of approach projects, how you create content for projects?
So I'm going to use a weird example as a for me I think it's kind of a weird example. Mine was an absolute failure. Is the project I'm going to use as my example. I did this adventure that I'd been putting some work into. I was really excited about it called and to think that I saw it on Ironmonger Street. It's supposed to be a little play on Mulberry Street there, and it was my first like potentially multi-session adventure I wrote on DM's Guild, and I was so excited about this. I got two different artists to come in and make art for it. My wife did the cover. I think she did a wonderful job, and then I also had a pal named Boog who came in and did some art for the interior. And so it was like the first project I ever did that I rather than just doing it all on my own or stock art, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a bank of money and pay it out to people, and I hired an editor, my friend Dennis, and then the book sold like 10 copies. Right. And it was a very much a commercial failure. Like luckily I had the money to pay everybody, and that was good. But what I learned from that was that there is a portion of this process that I enjoy. I love the writing. I love figuring out the adventure portions. I do not love being responsible for all of it. This is not something that I really want to do. And it also it was my but strangely I learned that I love working with people. So like even though I didn't make a lot of money, I don't see that as a bad experience because like I learned how to reach out and talk to somebody about art. I learned how that process works back and forth with somebody I didn't know. It was there's a lot of lessons that I learned through that, and now which affects how I kind of speak about what I do and about what I want to do. Right? It's back in the day it was I want to make a book. No, no, that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to see my writing turned into a book, which is a slight subtle difference, but it sure takes a lot of pressure off of me now when I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
That's
So
that's huge. That
yeah.
and again, like when we're trying to, shine a light on the creative process and the collaboration process and what you learn from all these things, that is completely valid. And you guys kind of naturally segued into something that I'm interested about too, because I mean, so far there's a concurrent theme about collaborating with people. Who we'll just keep it with you for a second, but then we'll throw it back to Zach. So Will, like, who would you credit as someone that you worked with who had an influence on you, or who you were able to learn from? Um,
Oh, I mean, it's Daniel Fox and then this guy right here in the interview with us, Zach. I have learned a ridiculous amount working from these two, working with these two. Daniel, I got the experience of what it was like to get a lot of feedback and how to do my very like first writing for someone else. He walked me through the process. He put a lot of emphasis on how to set up contracts and how to read contracts and make sure that they say what I need them to say to the point to where now I can write my own contracts and I feel pretty comfortable with it, right? And because that's a scary thing when you're first trying to do freelancing is like somebody hands you a legal document. You're like, what do I do with this? Right? What does that mean? Zach here, I've learned a lot from Zach through conversations he and I have had, and I'm going to toot Zach's horn for the first time in my life. I'm going to say nice things about Zach here.
First and
Um,
only. I
First and
probably, yeah,
only,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
this part's going to get completely cut out of the interview, so there's
yeah.
no proof of it. So I feel pretty
Yeah.
good about this.
Yeah.
No, but I learned a lot from watching how Zach runs things. So Zach had mentioned a bit ago about how you didn't say these words, but how the DM's not DM's Guild, the Adventurers League was sort of Wild West for a little while there. Like things were somewhat chaotic, and you would get onto projects, maybe not having to do with Adventurers League, but you'd get onto projects that were not organized. The scope creep had gotten out of control, and then you're trying to rein it all back in, right? Or sometimes you would rein it all back in. And I get the benefit of getting to work with Zach running projects after he has learned those lessons, right? So I get to watch in Devoured Labyrinth and the one that we're finishing up, Dark Devilry right now. Watching how he is wrangling, like I think on how many writers do we have on Devoured, Zach?
I think we had close to 19 or somewhere around there.
19 writers, right? So he's in charge of 19 writers. I used to be in retail management, and I never had to deal with 19 people at one time in terms of employees, right? Watching him juggle all that, and then watching it create this book that is something that like I think is beautiful. I can't wait to get my hands on this thing, right? And I'm really proud to have been a part of that. And then watching him do it again with Dark Devilry with a slight, significantly less people, but instead of it's less people, but now he's doing two separate books, right? And I've gotten to learn so much from that, like how on one hand, how to be a good project manager about it, or at least what I want to see from a project manager, but also how I can be a better freelancer when and what I can do to what I believe make his life a little bit easier, right? And it's learning by immersion. And this guy right here, these two projects, I've learned a ridiculous amount from, and I'm very thankful for it. And if you ever tell anybody I said those nice things about Zach, I swear.
Yeah,
No one
I
would
can't
believe
make
you.
any
You'd be fine.
promises.
Yeah.
I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that at least a couple hundred people are going to see this video. Um, so Zach, how about you? What people, who would you acknowledge who maybe helped you or or who you learned from and how did they help you or influence you?
Yeah. I would say somebody that jumps to mind right out the gate was is Andy Hand. Um, Andy spelled Andy, Hand spelled like it usually is. Um, Andy is still doing, I think. I don't think the line is completely closed out, but he was doing a line of projects called Limitless Adventures. It's a publication for fifth edition. Um, and I don't remember exactly how. Maybe we were on a Facebook group together. Maybe we just connected some other way. But we started to chat about the time that I was starting to do my first Kickstarter. And Andy was the most helpful person ever. Like, he's super nice. He was doing stuff that was very similar to what we were doing in his own way, and he had found success there already. And so I could go pick his brain about Kickstarter or publishing or pricing on my stuff, like all sorts of things. And he was just ready to be like, yeah, absolutely. Let me talk to you about that, or let me give you my data or whatever. Um, super, super, super helpful. He's actually got a project right now on Kickstarter. It'll probably still be live when your audience is listening to this. It's called Danger Cubed. He still does a lot of like 5e stuff and a lot of like little eclectic indie zines and things that are really cool. Um, but Andy's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, and he was like, I don't know. We would have made a lot more mistakes in that first few projects if we didn't have Andy to fall back on to kind of like tell us where all the pitfalls were. I can't express how much we appreciate him. So
Well, it's funny. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you knew Andy because I
sure.
know Andy and I've known Andy
Yeah.
for a while. And fans of my channel know Limitless because I've done unboxings. I've backed
Hmm.
pretty much all their Kickstarters and the ones that I missed out on, I just bought the books whenever I saw them.
Sure.
Andy is absolutely a great guy. Andy and Mike, actually, I'm
Mike,
hoping,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
too.
I'm hoping to have Andy and Mike on a future episode to talk about Limitless and all their learning experiences too. But that's super cool. I really didn't know that you connected with him, and he is absolutely an awesome guy.
So what I
Um,
think is funny about the two of you knowing Andy is that actually tied up underneath my desk here, I actually have No, I'm kidding. Sorry, I just wanted to
Uh,
jump in on
bring up
that.
an Andy.
Yeah, it's
Um,
Andy.
Yeah, no, the Limitless books are on the shelves over there, and they are, yeah, they dove into 5e when 5e was, in the golden era. They put out a ton of stuff, and it's not all fantasy. Like they started doing, their own spin-off things where they'd have like a whole Victorian thing, but it's with the 5e mechanics, so it was very familiar, very easy to pick up, and a lot of fun. They've done some, like you mentioned, Zach, some other stuff too with uh basically like these box sets where it's a
yep.
whole adventure in a box set. And what I found as in my other role as the D&D club advisor at the high school is that these box sets are great because you could each take a turn DMing one of the encounters. So for new players of any age, if you're afraid to step up to the role of being a DM, their box sets are awesome because you don't have to DM the whole adventure. You just run like one encounter. And there's a mix of encounters. Some of them are exploration based, some are kind of social interaction. Some of them are, puzzles, traps, obstacles to overcome. Some of them are combat. So it's a really nice mix, and it gives an opportunity for everybody at the table to kind of take a turn as the DM and run an encounter. So yeah,
Yeah,
cool side note there. And it also, I think, illustrates how small, we think of like the
sure.
TTRPG community, which is, sort of silly because it's worldwide. It's I would say there's probably hundreds or maybe thousands of little communities, right? But even then, small world, right? You
I
run into people, and I usually, I mean, I see Andy every year at Gen Con, but
Yeah.
I see him sometimes more than once a year, and it's always great to catch up. So I guess my question is, how much of your writing and your content is influenced by the actual game that you are, for which you are writing? So like, so Zach, you, excuse me, you mentioned the Mork Borg project with
Yeah.
Shackles, right? Like, so how much of the writing and the ideas were influenced by the game itself and maybe even by like the mechanics of the game? Talk about that a little bit.
So, Will talked about how he is obsessed with the framing of an adventure. My obsession is mechanics and how mechanics influence uh, themes and genre. Um, I think the best games out there are the ones where they have found a way to allow the dice that you're rolling to add to the immersion that we're trying to achieve. A great example of this, the best example arguably, is the Alien RPG.
I knew you were gonna say
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason it's, if not my favorite RPG, it's one of them. Because the dice that you're rolling are simple. It's just a D6 dice pool, but the addition of stress die and how the more stressed you are, the more points of stress you are, you're adding D6s. So the cool thing there is you have more chances for success because, as people get stressed, as they're put in stressful situations, there's this chance of like true heroism coming out or true feats of strength coming out because, maybe you can leap that distance that you couldn't have leapt if your adrenaline wasn't pumping, right? So there's that cool stress mechanic there, plus then the idea of like you're looking for the ones to pop up to where you actually panic, and then not just the dice, but like when you go to zero, you're rolling on a critical injury table, but you never actually die until you roll a high enough critical injury that kills you. So you have moments where, you might be walking down a hallway and a Xeno jumps out and attacks the first guy and sends a tail straight through the guy's helmet, and you roll high enough on the critical injury table that he dies. And it's basically a one shot, one kill, he's dead. And then the next guy could be fighting that alien for round after round, rolling critical injury after critical injury, but they never get above a certain threshold. So, he's got a smashed hand and he's got a broken foot and he's got a missing eye and his ear's been torn off and his guts are hanging out and he's probably going to die in the next hour, but he's managed to stay alive and to just keep wailing on the Xeno until he finally finishes it off. That's amazing. And all of that is informed by the mechanics. So when you ask, like, how does it inform? I think the answer for me always is 100% it informs it. Um, it Now that sometimes means what we just talked about, where you're looking at mechanics that are already existing and you're saying, how do we lean into those, embrace the things that this game does well? Um, and sometimes, especially in some of the later 5e stuff that I've written, it's about what is this game? What is the type of game that this is? Well, it's heroic fantasy. What is things that I could inject or add to this adventure or add to this whatever it is that helps reinforce that this game doesn't already do? Like maybe a mass combat system or chase mechanics or something like that. That's like, how can I write this in a way that is nestled cleanly within the heroic fantasy and the 5e mechanical framework, but actually addresses chase scenes in a more interesting way than what WotC is currently doing or what I see doing done elsewhere, or maybe I just see a really cool chase mechanic in a different game. I'm like, and I think this would actually be a really good fit with a couple of tweaks for a fifth edition environment. I care deeply about how mechanics inform gameplay. And like in the case of the Mork Borg adventure, yeah, that was like saving these other ideas for the right system and the right project to put it with. And that worked out really well. But yeah, I think it's always at the forefront.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's a really, that's a gem. That's a gem
Good,
for
good,
people
good.
to consider how they approach creating content and specifically, integrating that stuff. That's really important.
Sure.
Will, what's your perspective on it? And I know you obviously have a lot of exciting agreement with Zac on this, but like what would you add to that, or how would you kind of also talk about how your approach with coming up with ideas would work?
So I'm gonna. I do agree with everything that Zach's saying, and he hit on my hot button, which is chase scenes in 5e, which always sends me into a blood curdling rage, blood boiling rage. But I'm going to add to that from my perspective when I'm looking at it from a commercial perspective, right? The way that I write the adventure, the way that I structure the adventure, I want this. If I'm writing for a particular system, I am not writing, like I'll use Shadowdark as an example. I'm writing this adventure to be used in Shadowdark, but I'm writing it for the customers of Shadowdark, for the people who play this game and who want more content. If I one of the things that kind of irritates me is when I see someone write an adventure and then it's and here it is in like 7 different systems that you can use it in, and that's fine. Like you can do that, and it's, but I think it's harder than sometimes I think people make it out to be, because you need to be writing for that audience, right? So when I read a fifth edition full big book adventure, there's a huge difference in the way that the adventure reads than a Shadowdark adventure does. And I'm not saying that 5e is better or worse. I'm not saying that Shadowdark is better or worse. I'm saying that you got to keep in mind, and I try to keep in mind, what are the differences between the two. Like fifth edition has more robust explanations. In some ways, they are trying to make the reading as enjoyable to the DM as if they were reading a novel. And again, I don't actually find a problem with that. I think that I love reading adventure books before I go to bed. It's an enjoyable experience for me. But when you read through Shadowdark adventures, that's not how it is. That's there's typically Shadowdark and OSE typically kind of strip down to the bare minimum of what a dungeon master needs to excite their own imagination, right? So when I write for these two, they are two completely different writing styles, and I always try to keep that in mind, because again, I'm not just making a product for to be played in Shadowdark. I'm making a product for like Shadowdark, or for 5e fans or Shadowdark fans, DM game masters who have trained to read adventures in a particular way, to be able to take this, pick it up and run it as best they can, right? So they don't have to code switch to whatever I decide is the best way to write an adventure. I want to make sure I adapt to them. I'm in their space, I want to adapt to them. And that's something I think about a lot.
I love that too. I think between you and Zac, considering the game, the setting, the mechanics, integrating your ideas into that, and then also considering your target audience and who's going to be playing it, buying it, and reading it, and running it is all really important. But now I have to fuck with you and be devil's
Yeah.
advocate.
Yeah, fuck
So
with us.
so what if I wanted to run Shackle, uh, but run it in 5e? Why could I do that?
You could
In
absolutely
other
do it.
words, what do you think about taking products, adventures from one game system and running it in another mechanical system?
Yeah, case in point, right? The whole reason that I got on the Shadowdark kick, a year ago was because I I love running in Middle Earth. Like Middle Earth is like my setting of choice when I'm GMing. And I'd always wanted to do a Moria campaign and just couldn't find the right way to do it, couldn't find the right system that I felt like could communicate what's interesting about Moria in the right way. Like, you know, I ran Middle Earth in several different systems at that point, and I'm like, none of these are going to give you the right vibes. Like One Ring is not a good system to run Moria in. I'm sorry, Free League. 5e 5e is not either, right? It's by default too heroic and too focused on the wrong things. Same thing with One Ring. Like all these that like Decipher system, like a lot of these are just focused on the wrong things. And when Shadowdark came out, and when I finally got my hands on it, I was like, oh, this is actually the right approach for a Moria book. And so I ended up running, I think it was like, oh gosh, I don't even remember. It was a ton of sessions of we ran all the way through. I bought the Moria book for 5e that Free League put out because that's really easy to convert to Shadowdark. And I really didn't change anything about that adventure, that campaign book, other than the conversion to Shadowdark's mechanics. And it worked brilliantly. I'm super happy with it. So I think the answer is it can definitely happen. And sometimes that's the best sauce. But I think that in the case of Shackle, if we were to use that as an example, I would say, well, maybe, but that's a really deadly adventure, a really grotesque adventure, and the monsters are designed to be punishing. So if you convert it over to 5e, just a straight conversion, it's not going to be the same as what I had with Moria, where it's like, this all works great. Um, Instead, what you're going to find is your player expectations for fifth edition are almost certainly going to get in the way when you have creatures designed to just rip them apart. So I think there is times when it'll work, but I think that comes down to the GM, and more often than not, it's going to be you saying, I know this adventure was written for this system over here, but I, as a GM, have the experience to recognize that it's actually a better fit for this thing over here. And that's why it all makes sense, as opposed to, oh, this crazy thing, I want to try to force feed it into, something that we like in a different space.
Will, do you have any examples of something that you wrote intended to be used with one system, but then, could be used in other systems, or that you
So
maybe, messed around with?
I mean a couple. I've not as much because my writing is a bit smaller, but I would say that most of what I do, most of the things I've written, at least in my early times, it could be hop from Pathfinder 2 or Pathfinder 1 to D&D to the 20 different variations of D&D, but probably not BX because my stuff's not deadly enough. My original stuff. I would say that it's kind of what Zach is saying in the sense that, I would exercise caution to the game master who does so, not because not because I think he feels that, it must be played in this, but rather just know what the changes you're making. You're not just making it's not just, sometimes it's not just about the dice that you're changing. It's about the feel of the game and the player expectations. And Zach said player expectation. I think that's really important. And any good game master should, consider how will the players react to this game. For instance, we've been playing Pirate Borg at my table for the past couple of weeks so I can get some practice in before Gamehole Con. And I did not start with the deadliest possible adventure. We start off with a kind of introductory adventure to ease them into the new expectations, right? Now, on the other hand, if you were to come to me and just kind of going back to the original way you asked the question to Zach, if you were to come to me and say, "Hey, well, I got this thing that you wrote, and I'm going to run it in a different system," one, exercise caution, but two, thanks. Like my writing inspired you to play this with your home table, and you want to use rules that you're more comfortable with. Hell, go right ahead, man. Like, please, absolutely. Here, I got a couple of other things too. You might want to look at converting.
Yeah,
I'll
good.
say the other thing that comes to mind here, just on a larger scale, is you brought up Pirate Borg, Will. So at Gen Con, up until this year, and including this year, um, we had been running a lot of Pirate Borg, but also we took our Dark Caribbean setting and we turned it into a fifth edition setting, and we took a lot of our adventures and turned them into 5e adventures. And there was an idea, and maybe there may be a kernel of this idea that still continues, but less so now. But there was this idea for a few years in the company that we were going to make a 5e setting book called the Dark Caribbean, and it was going to be everything about Pirate Borg, but for fifth edition. And it's going to have new rules for how to do cool swashbuckling adventures in five and all that, right? And so when we ran adventures at Gen Con and we used fifth edition rules, we did certain things. Like I made the pre-gens for those adventures. They're level one pre-gens, but instead of you getting max health like you do in a regular 5e level one character, it was random. It was like, oh, you're a ranger. Okay, you get a D8 plus con, whatever that ended up being. And so that meant that like the bard ended up with like one hit point and whatever, right? Um, and we said, the difficulty of the adventures, we want to make them still difficult. We want them to still be, deadly in the way that Pirate Borg is. And our vision was like, we want to help 5e players get an experience of something other than the heroic fantasy that they've been used to and kind of see what a different taste could look like. I don't think Shadowdark actually is that far off from that goal either. Like if you look at it and what Kelsey originally was working on and what she put out, it's kind of that again, 5e reimagined. Um, what we found, not in like an overwhelming number, but when our games were getting like a 99 or 98% approval, like enjoyment rating, and like people like really, really talked about them. Almost all of the quote unquote negative feedback that we got was from fifth edition players who signed up because they're like, oh, Pirates in 5e sounds great. That absolutely did not like the idea of us mucking with the heroism and the kind of default experience or the designed experience of that game. Um, it was very clear that there's a chunk of that audience that was like, sure, this might be cool, but it's not D&D, it's not 5e, it's not what I want out of my gaming experience. And if I wanted that, I would play Pirate Borg, right? Like that's the message, right? So I think just on a bigger scale, maybe even than my home game or our home games, seeing it on that level of like, yeah, you are stepping into a whole different pool, into a whole different ocean there. Anytime you switch systems, and to Luke to Will's point, like recognizing that those people have proclivities, they have interests, they have preferences, and they've chosen that system because it does that thing, right? It aligns with it. So you saying, I'm going to be the one to change it, there's a chunk of them that don't want to be changed. They found the thing they love and they want it to be that. And we are in the wrong, arguably, to insist that they should enjoy something different.
Wow.
I Yeah, sorry, you hit the nail on the head with that. I was thinking about how there's that argument well there's often the argument that rears its ugly head, of like fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons players hate death and they don't want to do it. It's like, well, hold on. I mean, maybe they do, but maybe they just don't want it in the game that's not about that, right? Like this is when I play fifth edition, I am expecting that death while may not be on the table as much, I will be challenged in other ways, right? But on the other hand, I also love sitting down and playing like OSC. I love sitting down and playing Mork Borg and Pirate Borg because I love the dangerous aspect of how the characters can die at any point. This does not say I like one or and not the other. I like them both. Just when I sit down to play these certain games, I'm coming in with the expectation, but also for a particular experience, right? Fifth edition I think is a great example of this in the sense that it can be deadly, but it also takes like 30 minutes to make a character, right? So if my character dies, I know that I have to sit there for way longer not playing the game. So death hurts more, right? Death hurts more. So I expect my character to have a little bit more survivability. So I don't have to, because I run shorter sessions in my house, I run like 2 hour sessions. So half an hour to an hour to make your character is almost the entire session I don't get to play with my friends, right? So there's different expectations for that, and the game supports those different expectations. I don't think there's anything kind of like Zach, what you're saying. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and I think that when we design things for these separate systems, we have to keep that in mind because we don't want to end up creating something that unintentionally makes a really poor player experience. Because then the DM who's buying your stuff is going to hate you for it, right?
Yeah. I mean, those are great points, and I think it strongly reinforces the assertion that, player expectations have a tremendous impact on the success of a game, whether that's at home, whether it's, at a game store or at a convention. So yeah, I get that. And that really kind of illuminates that entire topic. Switching gears.
Ooh, I like
You
yours.
guys, you guys have published things. How much of your content do you own? So you
None.
put
Uh,
something out. Now it's out in a book. Maybe you collaborated, whatever. but do you own that? Do you own that intellectual property anymore?
You're saying basically zero, Will.
For the most, other than my DM's Guild, for me, I own virtually nothing. But that's because I do it a lot. I've been coming on to a lot of other people's projects. Yeah, the DM's Guild stuff, I own what 50% of it basically. Until I decide to
Well,
take it off DM's Guild.
you get a royalty of 50% and you own
Oh,
0%.
that's right. Oh yeah, so I own nothing.
Yeah.
Not until next year when I release my own personal Kickstarter, and then I'll finally know the sweet, delicious delights of ownership.
How about you, Zach?
Yeah, I think it's gone through a few evolutions. So, I used to own quite a bit of stuff. Every Kickstarter project that I, you know, did, which was a good number, I owned. Then I joined with another company as a minority owner. When I left that company, my products stayed with them. So it's been a roller coaster of ownership. Right now, I'd say a handful out of I think I roughly have been credited in about 100 books, right? So like if you have 100 books, maybe I own five of them right now. Um, that said, like it's a good question because I talk to a lot of creators who are worried about that, or that's a big focal point for them. And I don't think that that's wrong, but I will say that for me, I think that there's far more things that I worry about than that. Like as a good example, some things that I do with Jeff Jones, who's the publisher on Dark Devilry, some of the things that we do in collaboration, he owns, and some of them I own or I share ownership with somebody else or whatever, right? Um, I really don't. There's not a big difference in how I view either one in my mind. I'm getting to work with the same people. When I work with Jeff, I get a paycheck, and Jeff pays me well, and I'm super happy with working with him, and I have a blast doing the projects, and so it's a win. And when it's something that I own, and I'm just using Jeff's company or his publishing house as another tool, and we're working together to make a thing. Yeah, I own the copyright, but I'm paying Jeff still, and I'm getting a cut still. Like in my mind, there's very little difference between them. Arguably, you could say that the difference comes in is, are you getting residuals? Are you getting a royalty? Does that matter? That's maybe the more important argument is like, hey, how many of your things are you slowly building up residuals on to like help supplement down the road? But at least for right now, that my focus is less on do I own it and more about, you know, am I getting to work on a fun thing with people that I enjoy working with?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want. Oh, sorry. I want to interject real quick if that's okay. Andrew Biszkinski, over at Gen Con this year gave me some really good advice on that, kind of helped me frame my perspective on this because I was kind of worried about that whole not owning certain things, and he and I were talking about this, and one of the things he brought up is he's like, it's great to own certain projects and it's great to, things that you're really proud of, but it's also nice to work on a project, put good effort into it, and then once it's out of your hands, you can just forget it and move on to something else. You can just go do something else. And I think where I'm at in my stage of my career, like, yeah, it'd be cool to own some things, but I'm perfectly fine being able to look for the next project rather than having to divide my attention in, okay, how am I going to manage the continued profitability of this thing while also trying to do something else. And it's nice. It's kind of like going into a normal job, right? Sometimes it's nice to be the man, the guy in charge, or the one who's runs the business, right? Sometimes it's cool to show up, get a paycheck, and get the heck out of there and enjoy your weekend, right? So.
Yes. Very, very insightful. And I think I mean, you guys probably figured I asked that question because again, like, when you're talking about how to choose, projects, who to work with, whether to self-publish or whether to jump on board with a kind of an established thing, I think those are all important considerations for people who want to maybe dip into, writing and creating for games. So yeah, I mean those experiences that you guys have shared have been tremendously valuable. So I will end this part by asking you what is the project that you are most proud of and why?
Zach, you want to take this one first, or do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, like probably right now at this moment, if I'm talking about projects that are published and out in the world, the one that I'm probably most proud of is I am the certainly not the only designer, but I would put myself as the original designer of the Marvel Multiverse starter set, um, which I'm super excited about. I love Marvel Multiverse RPG. I think it's a cool game. I think for me, it does a lot of the things that I want out of a superhero game. We don't have time to get into it all, but like the circuitous route of getting to be the designer of that was wild and fun. Um, and it was a complete shock when it happened. And so there's a lot of reasons for it, but that's definitely like my oh, I'm very proud to be on that project in such a specific way.
So Zach, just to follow up on that specific project, where is that, or when is that in your like chronology of your career? Like, is that recent?
Mm, I think it just came out like I think at the beginning of this year. It was written like oh gosh, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that, right? So it's kind of in the middle-ish. Um, there's a whole lot of things that came about for that. As I mentioned at the beginning, like I do a lot of Kickstarter consulting. I did a lot of like uh, convention consulting and management. And so that this project kind of came out of that. Um, and again, definitely by surprise, and not was it was not my intent to I'm gonna pitch Marvel on doing their starter set. That conversation never happened. But but the project still happened, and it was like it's just cool. It's cool. I love starter sets. They're like my favorite thing in the world. So to be the writer on a big starter set like that was definitely checks a thing off the bucket list.
Awesome. How about you, Will? What is the project that you are most proud of, released or unreleased, and why?
It is right now, and this answer changes, by the way, depending on what mood I'm
Sure.
in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
right now it's
Same.
Dark Devilry, which is the product that we have coming out on Kickstarter soon. But my favorite part about the project is I was given this kind of specific portion to write, and then I got into writing it. And I had so much fun writing it. And I went to Zach. I'm like, hey, I've got this part done, and he's like, you want to take this part too? I'm like, yeah, okay, great. And I get write that, and I go back to Zach. I'm like, hey, I got this done too. He's like, do you want to write this also? I'm like, yes, great. And it just started turning out like my portion was supposed to be. I was so happy to do this small portion, and it just grew and grew and grew, and I just the excitement of it has just kept going and going and going to the point to where now it's like this is gonna be one of the first writing projects where my name isn't in a list of 19 writers. It's gonna be me and like four guys, and like I'm really there's a lot of pride in that to see my name is going to be like on the same physical line as other people's, right? It's like a little bit of a step closer to that goal of see of all my goals. So I'm really excited about this project.
That's awesome. So, Zach, give us the short tagline summary. Like, what is Dark Devilry?
Yeah, so Dark Devilry, our goal is for it to be the definitive take on demons and devils in Shadowdark. Um, it's all the resources that you can need to like pad out that corner of the dark realms. So in Shadowdark core book, it is you got, a two-page spread of demons, a two-page spread of devils, and then a smattering of other fiends kind of mix and match throughout the bestiary. Um, we are coming off of a book that I did with Jeff called Dark Visions, which is like an approach of all the like the definitive answer for cults in Shadow Dark, where we did a bunch of different cults, domains, new demigods, new classes, new cult spells, and then a bunch of adventures to tie with it. Same approach here, where Dark Devilry, the resource book, is several new classes that contend with demonic forces like the Diabolist and the Sin Eater. Um, and then a bunch of new spells that are tied to devils and demons. It has dozens of new devils and demons. It has a bunch of new profane relics. And then kind of the focal point of this book is six archdevils, six demon lords, and six what we're calling demons or daemons, which are things that don't quite fit the mold of a devil or a demon. Like hags are a good example of this, right? Or Oni are a good example of this. Um, so each one of these six, six, and six individuals are named entities that have cool stat blocks, write-ups, they have minion tables, they have horde tables, they have things that they desire, they have avatars that they can transform into. They have all these things. They also have a stronghold. That stronghold has different locations and it has write-ups for it. It has what's in their vault. So I think it's like 8 pages of content, 6 to 8 pages of content for each one of these individuals, so that when you enter the Inferno, which is what we call our dark realm, you have a toolkit in the resource book to populate it with all sorts of things, with these 18 different strongholds, with the city of Dis, with all the mechanics for that. But also, when you're outside the Inferno, we're giving you expanded rules for possession. We're giving you, expanded rules for making pacts with devils and demons, things of that nature. So that's one book, is kind of all of that in a nutshell. And then the second book, just really fast, is for adventures that take that content and give you an adventure path, so to speak, that can be joined together into a campaign in Inferno. Will's Adventure is the level 0 gauntlet that places you from the typical material realm and dumps you into the dark realm of Inferno. And then the others are you wandering through that and trying to find a way out, or maybe just engaging with the space. We've got new treasure tables that are all focused on that. And each one of these adventures is written by either a writer or a pair of writers that I've worked with in the past, and I think can really bring something to this kind of like dark, demonic pseudo setting.
So I have a follow-up question because I you just presented a lot of stuff and I was thinking to myself,
Sure.
when you're creating this content for Shadowdark for a game, how much influence or structure or guidelines are given to you or like prohibitions by the company, by the Arcane Library? Like, do you have to like check in with them to be like, hey, we want to, we this is what we want to do. Here's the ideas, and they got to give you the blessing, or is it just like, yeah, go for it? Like, what's that like?
Almost always the answer is go for it. They don't care to a great extent. Not to, that's wrong. They care. Um, they are excited for you to do what you're excited about. We'll say it that way. Almost never do I reach out when I'm doing something under a third party license like Mork Borg, Shadowdark, OSE, 5e. I'm not reaching out to people and saying, "Oh, this is my idea. Can I do it?" I think I've done that once, and that, or maybe twice. And the most recent time was with the crawler deck that we did for Shadowdark, where I was like, I think the terminology of this license and what I want to do, I'm kind of like on the edge of what this license is permitting. And I want to make sure that I'm on the right edge and they're going to be happy with what I put out. So there's every once in a while I'll have a project that I'm like, I kind of want to check in on this one because the wording of their license and my project are kind of not at odds, but I'm pushing against the line. And I don't like pushing against the line um frequently. Most of the time though, you're looking at what they've put out and you're saying, I love this. How can I leave my stamp, or how can I contribute to this community? What does this series need that it doesn't currently have? What do they have coming out that is, do they have something coming out that's already going to answer that, or is there something that I can do that's kind of going to help out? And so, with the cult book and with Dark Devilry, it was me looking at Shadowdark and saying, okay, well, Shadowdark at its core is about you as people, free peoples that are in the light, that are in the surface or in the whatever, going into places of darkness and, fighting agents of chaos, entities that are aligned with chaos, and expelling the shadow dark, right? Or expelling the darkness and contending with the shadow dark as a general concept. And so for me, when I think about that and I look at what they have, it's like, of course we need a book about devils and demons because yeah, they're such a focal point of that, and we don't have a lot of information on them. But yet, as players, at least at my table, and what I see is like we like contending with those sorts of like clearly evil forces. Um, Shadowdark is not a social game. It can be, right? Like you can go hang out at a ball and, yada, yada, yada. But really, if you look at the mechanics of it, going back to that, right? It's a dungeon crawler about fighting things.
Yep.
Um, and it's not a game about moral dilemmas. They can be in there. And I think there can be some really great ones in there, but that's not really the heart of the game. The game is about fighting and killing stuff. So I don't like if every time we put you in a encounter, you're having to, as a player, have a moral conflict about what if it's what I'm doing right. We're doing something wrong. We're fighting against the game. So devils and demons are great because there's no moral conflict. They're evil creatures that enjoy the torment and pain and death of others. So we can kill them. We might still choose to ally with them or to partner with them for certain objectives, but at their core, there's something that we can kill and move on and not like, have a depression in our psyche. Um, that appeals to me greatly, and I think hopefully that's what brings it here. But I think, Kelsey is aware of our project. Michael is aware of our project. Two of the main people at Shadowdark. I think we've got two big thumbs up from them. But that's just because we are excited about our thing and we're sharing it in the same spaces that they are, not because we felt like we had to reach out and say, "Is this okay?"
No,
I that's great. Oh, go ahead, Will.
no, I was gonna say, I think that's part of one of the reasons we like designing for Shadowdark so much is because, I'm going to speak for Zach here, but I'm speaking for me, unintentionally speaking for Zach. The Arcane Library has a really good community, and they very much support. They do a good job of supporting third party creators by providing them the space to not only talk about it, but also they share things, and you it makes you feel not only it makes you feel welcome to create things for them. And that's a really important part, especially since we don't have to go and ask permission because they put out that license up front and forward, and we do our best to follow it, but they try to be as unambiguous as they can. So that way we don't have to we don't approach them with, on our hands and knees begging. We instead approach them as, hey, got this cool idea. And they see, they seem to respond back in turn. And
So,
that's
and that, I think what I'm hearing with you guys is that, when you're considering creating this kind of content and maybe working with a company that has a third party licensing agreement, know what that is, know what the limitations or guidelines are, obviously, and then also think deeply about the game itself, the themes of the game, so that the content that you're writing is appropriate for that game and for its player audience. And that really, I mean, in a nutshell, you guys like tied that back to what we were originally talking about when we're thinking about content creation and thinking about mechanics and the audience and the players who are going to consume it.
I've seen so many times on like Twitter and I'm sorry, X, and in other social medias, where somebody has gone and they've created a project for some sort of game or some sort of like side, what do you call it? Accoutrement, not accoutrement. I can't remember the word, the normal human word for thing.
Accessories.
That's the word that I can't think of, accessory. But I've seen a number of people who have made things, but they don't check the license. They don't do it, and then they get shocked when they get shut down, right? And then people get angry when they get shut down. But the thing is, that's on us, the creators, to know the space that we are working in. We need to know what space you're working in, and know the audience you're going for. Is there actually a need here, or are you just trying to impose what you want in there? And I think that's a serious question people need to ask themselves. Yeah, it's so important to start with that license, in my opinion. It's so
Well,
important.
so and since follow up to the follow up question, since both of you guys have created content for like 5e and DM's Guild, but also other games, what's the difference roughly between the licensing agreement to create content for Shadowdark versus say like Wizards of the Coast?
I'll tell you, this people I don't know. I think a certain corner of the internet maybe would be surprised by this, but one of the most permissive licenses out there is and will always be the D&D license,
Yes.
the OGL before it was in Creative Commons, and now even more so after. Like it's so easy to create for it, and it's so easy to know where the lines are with it. Um, there's other licenses that are crazy permissive, like the Mork Borg license is a good example of that, or the Powered by the Apocalypse license. Like those are like basically don't be a dick, don't do anything that we're gonna like that's gonna ruin our reputation, and you're gonna be just fine. Um, and I don't think that there's really an argument that the Shadowdark license is more restrictive than the D&D license. Um, that might
Give me
come
an
across
example,
as
like in what way?
yeah, so you can only create a supplement in the Shadowdark game. You can't create your own core book. So like in D&D, if I want to create if I somehow got the Middle Earth license, I'm like, I'm gonna do this right, God damn it. And I decided I wanted to make a fifth edition project. I can make a core fifth edition Middle Earth book, just like Free League did, and I don't owe Wizards anything. I can just do it. With Shadowdark, the license says this book here that Will has behind him and that I've got sitting on my shelf must be a requirement to play your game. You can't say, "Oh, you don't have to buy this. You got," because we put all the basic rules in ours. Like that's a huge, huge, huge requirement. That's a
Yes.
huge restriction on your license. Because as an example, there's not a sci-fi version of Shadowdark right now. And I know there's like Than and others are making like cool sci-fi things for it, but they are restricted by this idea of like, well, you have to have this fantasy book and you have to buy it and you have to run pieces out of it because I can't write certain things and put them in mine. I'm not complaining about that really at all. It's Kelsey's game, it's Arcane Library's game. They can do whatever they want to with it. And the fact that they have a license that's as permissive as it is means that we can do some really cool things even still, which we are doing. But I am saying that like there's this mindset, especially in the last few years, that like WotC is the villain and they're trying to like get a grasp on your fun. And to some extent, that's true, that some of the stuff that they've done is that way. But what is not true is that they have put out a license that has been brutal. They've actually done the opposite. And in fact, it's like still arguably the gold standard for what a license should and could look like. And for as permissive as it can be while still protecting themselves.
I'm
I
going to
mean,
hop on that. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
hop on that. I know that sometimes people get DM's Guild and the Creative Commons license mixed up a bit, which they're similar but not the same thing. DM's Guild is not for every possible 5e product that comes out. It's specifically for 5e products that uses their IP. So if you want to set, if you desperately need to set your adventure that you write in the Forgotten Realms, if you refuse to release your subclasses or your spells outside of the context of let's say Eberron or Ravenloft, then yeah, you got to go with DM's Guild, and that is pretty restrictive, in the sense that you're going to lose half your funds to drive to DM's Guild and all that jazz, but. That's only if you want to use their intellectual property. If you go ahead and use just the basic rules that they've released for free into Creative Commons, you can do whatever you want. You never have to say a word to Wizards of the Coast. You could build an empire and that outsells Wizards of the Coast in every fashion, and there'd be nothing they can do about it because that's how free their license is, right? I think that sometimes people conflate the DM's Guild and the Creative Commons license as if they're the same. They're most certainly not. You just need to know you just need to understand the difference between what is considered IP and what is not considered IP. And once
That's
you
also,
master that, you can do whatever you want.
yeah, thank you. That's also huge. I think both of you really clarified that because, I mean, let's be honest, there's so much shit talking about these things by a lot of people who just aren't informed, who don't have the perspective that you guys have as published creators within those different platforms and with other companies. So that's huge, and I appreciate you guys kind of clarifying that for me and for my audience because
Sure.
I think it's really interesting. Okay, now for the quick fun part.
Sure.
So, as DMs, as GMs running games, what do you think are the most important traits for a DM to have to practice and to develop?
Improvisational skills, hands down. Like that's like you got to be able to, you have to be able to bounce back and forth between people. And yeah, I know that when people say improv, they mean yes and, or yes and pops up. You can say no, but no but works a lot better, right, than just no. The idea is that improvisation is really no different than just having a conversation with a friend, right? You want to make sure that the conversation keeps going. And TTRPGs, in my mind, are the exact same way. The idea is to keep the fun going until it's time to get these people the hell out of your house so you can go to bed, right? And the most important skill you can have is not only the ability to keep the conversation going, to keep the fun going, but also the desire to make it keep going, right? The drive to ensure that every single person at your table, whether it's just the only two people you could get to join you on a Friday night, or if it's the 20 people who showed up because, good Lord, you have too many friends, and what are you doing, man? You got to you have to have that drive to want everyone to be in on the conversation and to be able to direct that, change that baton, and make sure that the scene, whether it be combat, whether it be role playing, whether I'm sorry, combat and role playing, it can't be the same thing, absolutely, but you know what I mean. You need to have the ability to maintain the conversation, keep the conversation going, and the drive to get everybody involved in that conversation, and that's what a good DM, in my mind, really has. The rules can come later, right? But that is something that you have to, like, if you don't master that skill, no amount of rules knowledge is going to keep people at that table with you.
Love it. Zach?
Yeah, I think timing is going to be my answer. Like I think the bane of every gaming table is a wasted session. Like I
Mm.
hate wasted sessions. I am guilty of them as a GM, just as, like I'm not saying that whatever, but like I've talked about this before. Like I'll run a lot of my games online. But I'll get done with a game online and close out the computer, get up, and my wife will often ask, like, how did tonight's session go? I'll be like, there's times when I've said, I don't think we actually accomplished anything. Like, we didn't move the narrative forward. They didn't figure out anything, like what, yada, yada, yada. And I hate it. And as much as I hate it as a GM, I doubly hate it as a player. I'm like,
Yep.
what did we do? Like, yeah, I like hanging out with these people, but like, ignore that for a minute. Like I could hang out with them in 30 different ways. Um, why did I choose this to be the reason that this to be our hangout option if we just like, sat on our thumbs for 3 hours or whatever, or you know, like to me, that's a big part of it. And it's not only the GM's responsibility, the players have of a responsibility there too, but it is largely the GM's responsibility to understand that there's an arc to every session. I'm obsessed with the Alien Earth TV show right now. It's on Hulu.
It's great.
There's a good podcast for it, and they were talking about how I was listening to the people who are in charge of the sound and the soundtrack, and they were talking about how it's difficult because it's a horror show on TV. So you have an 8 hour arc, but you also have 1 hour segments. And how do you get, at the end of every Alien movie, you have catharsis, you have a release. How do you ensure that that release still happens at the end of every hour, but that the horror, the suspense, the dread carries over across 8 episodes? And the same is true for DMs, is that it's our job to give that arc of, tension and release that makes sense within, and cliffhanger perhaps or whatever, within the scope of a space, and that we're moving forward. I mean, like I've become in my circle at least, I've become the massive proponent for 6 to 10 sessions is a campaign. Like I've also break that often and have ran longer and whatever, but like most games are at their best if you can get 6 to 10 sessions at most out of it, because then you can actually make sure that the narrative stays the focus. You can get the pacing right. You can have that tension that continues. And if you ever go past 10 sessions, you're definitely on hard mode as a GM, because you have to find a way to continue that tension building, tension release, tension building, tension release, and narrative continuation. It's so easy in session 15 and session 25 to get off on a side tangent, lose all sense of the plot, lose all sense of tension, be on a side quest for 4 weeks, and then nobody actually cares about what's going on anymore. And then people stop showing up, and then, 3 months later, you've stopped running the game entirely. So I don't know. I've talked for a long time, but I care really strongly about how tension works in a game.
It,
kind
it
of.
felt tense, you talking about it.
Sure,
I
sure.
love that, and I think you both touched on hugely important things that DMs, whether they're new or whether they're veterans, should always be working on. Always be working on
Yeah.
improvisation and listening and reacting and engaging, and always be working on your pacing. It's those are two huge blocks of what goes into to being a good DM. All right, favorite. You know what? That's always a hard question. Top three in no particular order. Top three favorite role playing games, tabletop role playing games.
Okay. Ooh, that's an interesting. Now, just to clarify, when you say role-playing games, we're talking about systems?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Hmm.
Okay, I can do it. I feel good about this. I'm gonna put Alien on there.
Okay.
I'm gonna put God damn it, I had them and then I lost them. I'm gonna put Alien on there. I'm gonna put Dune on there. By Modiphius, the 2D20 system. And I'm gonna put Zweihander on there. If I'm gonna run a fantasy game that's not in Middle Earth, it's gonna be Zweihander all the time. So those would probably be my three: Dune, Zweihander, Alien.
Excellent choices.
I'm gonna. I always hate answering this question because I feel like I feel like my answer is embarrassing. But I spend a lot of my time running various versions of Dungeons and Dragons, so all three of my answers are going to be different for different reasons. Third edition Dungeons and Dragons is one of my top favorites. Third and 3.5, not because I think it's a great system, because it was the first system. It's what started it all. And then though I'll probably never touch that system again, you couldn't pay me to run it again. I just love it so much. I think the lore was great. I think I felt it got me into this. I love it so much, and I still have most of my books, and I still try to go and find whatever books I've lost in my collection because it's the root of it all for me. Second, fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, which I know is a weird thing to say to a lot of people, but fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons was where I was my most creative. It's where I felt it's this was back when every single adventure I would run was not pre-written. I was making it all up as I go. I was like, doing the true DM stuff, and I really enjoyed that time periods, and I always associate fourth edition with that. And that was important to me. Fifth edition is important is my favorite is probably my favorite system of all right now because it's the one that me and my friends play the most right now, and it's what's getting people at the table. And while we all love other systems too, and no one is saying we can't play anything but fifth edition, it's the one we know now, and we're in the middle of like a 2.5 year campaign right now. So it's Zach saying he prefers small. Me, if it's not lasting 5 years, what's the point of even playing the game? I've decided, knowing full well I've never actually finished a 5 year campaign because I lose my mind and quit and go do something else because all these books are coming out. Fifth edition I love because it's one of my friends and I are playing right now, so I like it. It's easy to design for, and it's also the system that I designed my first writing for, and I just have a lot to thank, like a lot of good things to say about it, even if there's definitely some problems I have with the system overall. So my answers is I love Dungeons and Dragons so damn much.
I love that. I love that you love it. I love that we talked about Alien. Have you guys played Blade Runner?
Oh yeah,
I
oh yeah.
haven't, but Zach's talked about it a couple times. I'd like
So
to.
I've been the very fortunate guest on Draven Swiftbow's private games. He ran Alien. We've done a bunch of Alien, and then he wanted to do Blade Runner. I loved Alien. Absolutely loved it
Or
for
did
all
we
the same
freeze?
reasons that you said, because the mechanics and just it really made you feel immersed, right?
Yeah.
Into the alien environment. Like, and it's not like you don't know what's coming. You know there's Xenos,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, but even then you'd be like, oh shit, like it's what's gonna be around this corner. Like, so we played a lot of different scenarios. We did colonial marines, we did stuff on ships, we did stuff, urban things. Loved Alien. Blade Runner, he started running Blade Runner, and I was like, this takes all the cool shit from Alien, but it puts it into the Blade Runner vibe, and oh man, just love that game.
Yeah. The
Um,
only downside to Blade Runner is that I think a huge amount of that game, the experience of that game is exquisite, but almost all of the exquisiteness of playing that game comes down to the incredible writing that they have on the adventures, the incredible handouts that they have. Like they craft investigations in a fantastic way, and
Yes.
I don't think they give us the best tool set to create your own stories.
Right.
So it's a if you I've ran the box set several times. Like I adore it, but it is a singular experience of what did they release for it? You should run that. That's what you should run. After that, maybe go play Alien again.
There are
Right?
a couple of games I have like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think because again, you reference this, the maps, the handouts, the same stuff that they do with Alien, they're doing that with Blade Runner, but then you create this expectation where the players are like, well, where's the, if you try to make up your own stuff, in other words, and you don't have all that shit, then they're going to be like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally get that. Have you guys played Blades in the Dark?
Iterations. I think that's the not a
So
lot though. I would love to.
I would
I've
add that to
stolen
my
from.
I'd add that to my list because I think when we talk about mechanics and the influence of the mechanics on the game,
Yeah.
I think they had a very similar thing where Harper created this thing where it really the world that he created was cool, right? The setting was cool. The themes in that were really cool. But the idea that the campaign was more than just your characters, like the crew that you created was an anchor. So if you got imprisoned, retired, killed, it didn't really matter. Like, I mean, sure, you cared about your character, but like you just make another character. That character could jump right back into the campaign because the
Sure.
crew was the glue that held it together. I think that mechanic and the kind of cinematic flashback elements were cool.
Their
Uh,
time clock mechanic is one of my favorite things,
yes, man.
and they get a ton of good press for it, and because it's worth it, and that's something that I absolutely I don't play Blades in the Dark, but I absolutely steal that mechanic, and use that in a lot of campaigns of of that time running out, the clock's going through, and that's how I do faction play is
Yeah,
by using that particular mechanic.
yeah.
So
So with all of these things that you've done, things that you're doing, games that you enjoy playing, we're going to close the interview with my final question. What is your dream project? Like if you could work for any company, with any company, or maybe it's not company based, but just the project that you would just absolutely love to do. I know this is a
Hmm.
good question, ain't it? You're like,
I have
fuck,
to
I gotta
choose.
think of a good answer.
I have two I'm trying to oscillate between. I'm like,
Okay, all right,
which one to mention?
okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna take this one first, Zach.
Great.
Okay. I swear I like things other than Wizard of the Coast, Dungeons and Dragons. I swear I do. But my dream project ha is and has been since high school. Eberron, Wizard of the Coast, Eberron, the Dungeons and Dragons setting. They've released a lot of like short adventures, but my dream is to be a part of a hardcover, full-length adventure from like level 1 to 15 or 20. I want to be leading that, and I don't want it, I want a Eberron adventure that's not just, hey, look, as we use different travel systems to go to, to give you a little bit of a taste of each country they have. No, I want a solid grounded story in one area, maybe each branch out to other places, and I want my name to be in that hardcover book on shelves. I've got it is that's my dream project, right? Either that or my own mega dungeon book like Rapanatha, because I've always wanted to do one of those two. But mainly right now, I'm going to say the Eberron. I'm sorry, I said both of them. I said both of my dream projects. I
No,
slipped it
but you
in.
know what? It doesn't happen unless you put it out there. So now
There
you
you
put
go.
it out there, Will. It will happen. And then people will look back and they'll be like, I remember him saying that on that interview with Bill 4 years ago or whatever. Yeah. So how
I
about you,
think
Zach? What's your dream project?
Yeah. So I think I had an answer for this a couple of years ago for a while, actually, years and years. My answer was either Mad Max or Jurassic Park. Like, I'd love to do either one. But I think that there's a lot of games that are coming out or have just come out that are actually Mad Max pretty much. And I think we got good enough, not that it wouldn't be fun to go back, but I think we scratched that itch. And then I just wrapped up Raptor Ruckus, which is my approach to Jurassic Park. Yeah, that's why I scratched that itch. So I was thinking about this the other day, actually, before we knew that we were coming on here, and I think that like as much as it would be absolutely terrifying, um, for a variety of reasons, like I think that we have yet to get an actual, for what I believe is important to it. I believe that we have yet to get a Middle-earth game that checks the boxes. And I don't know that like what I would create would be the perfect Middle-earth game by a long shot, but I think for what I'm looking for out of the Middle-earth game, I could deliver something that is better than what we've got so far. Um, I don't think that there's certain projects like the Moria campaign book for Free League. I don't think that nobody ever is going to top that for a campaign in
It's
Middle-earth. It's
so
like
good.
it's perfect. But the system, nobody has yet figured out how a system can complement Middle-earth. Arguably, people would say, well, One Ring, but One Ring is only if you don't give a shit about combat. Um, and I contend that, especially if you don't give a shit about combat, or that is very linear and very like board gamey, right? That's what One Ring combat is it's very forced into a singular track. And I think that especially when you start building in things like hobbits, you need a system that has allowances for people being creative when it comes to their encounters and their choices as a player in those encounters. And One Ring is not that. And nothing else is that in all the ways that I want. One Ring is maybe the closest, but it's not there yet. So yeah, I'd love to try my hand at that at some point.
Gentlemen, those are excellent answers. I look forward to these releases when they,
There you go.
they come out in a few years, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
just gotta
Zac,
wait for Keith Baker to give me that
yeah,
call.
just, you know, you
Yeah.
just gotta make the right connections. You know, it'll happen over drinks at Gen Con, and then the next thing you know, you'll be grinding away for years on these projects.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Well, you guys, it's been an absolute pleasure having you both on. And I really appreciate the insights that you have shared on this episode. Just profound insights into what goes on from the whole process, you know, and the evolution of ideas and how projects get put together, the collaborative process, and ultimately how they get delivered. So thank you very much, really, truly, for coming on this episode. And for my guests, check the description below. I'll have the links to their projects and the upcoming Kickstarter so that you guys can jump in. And thanks again to my guests, Will and Zac, for coming on this episode of Behind the Book with Bill. Until the next one, keep reading. Game on.
Well, hello, and welcome to Bill Allan World. I am Wizzy, the Wizard. I'm back once again to remind you to subscribe and click on the notifications button, and also watch videos that are over there. Tune in to the next episode of whatever show you are just watching, and watch other shows featuring Bill. He made me say that because he's a narcissist. Okay, bye.